The People's Temple and the Tragedy of Jonestown. The story of the People's Temple is one of vision, manipulation, and ultimate tragedy. Founded by Jim Jones in the 1950s, the People's Temple began as a progressive, racially integrated congregation dedicated to ideals of social justice and community service. Over the following decades, however, what started as a utopian vision gradually devolved into a toxic environment marked by paranoia, coercion, and fear. This descent culminated in one of the most harrowing mass tragedies of the 20th century, the mass murder-suicide at Jonestown, Guyana, on November 18, 1978, where more than 900 men, women, and children lost their lives, many after being forced or coerced to drink cyanide-laced poison. To fully understand the magnitude of Jonestown, we must first explore the early life of Jim Jones, the origins of the People's Temple, and the societal and psychological factors that allowed Jones to exert such extreme control over his followers. It is a story that begins not with death, but with hope, a hope for a better, more just world. The early life of Jim Jones, charismatic origins. Jim Jones was born on May 13, 1931, in Crete, Indiana, a small, rural town marked by economic hardship and a deep divide between social classes. From an early age, Jones displayed traits that would later define his leadership: a fascination with religion, a desire for control, and a penchant for charismatic oratory. Raised during the Great Depression, Jones witnessed the impacts of poverty firsthand. His father, James Thurman Jones, was a disabled World War I veteran, and his mother, Lynetta Putnam, struggled to support the family with sporadic work. Jones was known among his peers for his intense personality and unusual behavior. Even as a young boy, he was drawn to the rituals and power of religious practices, often preaching to other children and organizing mock church services where he expected them to sit and listen as he delivered sermons. His early experiences gave him a sense of identity and purpose, instilling in him a belief that he was destined for greatness. As Jones grew older, he became more determined to rise above his circumstances. His fascination with the Bible grew alongside his interest in charismatic leaders and political icons. He began to see religion not just as a means of spiritual connection, but as a tool to exercise power over others. This blending of religious conviction with a desire for influence would later become the foundation of his leadership within the People's Temple. Founding the People's Temple, a vision of social justice. In 1955, Jones took his first step toward realizing his vision by founding the People's Temple in Indianapolis. From the beginning, the church was different from traditional congregations. While many churches were racially segregated, the People's Temple was fully integrated, welcoming black and white members alike. Jones preached passionately about the evils of racism, calling it a symptom of society's deep-rooted corruption. His sermons, which combined elements of Pentecostal fervor with a message of social justice, resonated with those who felt alienated by mainstream religion and society. Jones's vision for the People's Temple was ambitious. He wanted it to be more than just a place of worship. He envisioned it as a community that would actively work to dismantle the social ills of the time. The church operated soup kitchens, free medical clinics, and programs for at-risk youth, quickly gaining a reputation for its charitable work. Jones became known not only as a pastor but as a community leader and advocate for social change. To his followers, he was a beacon of hope, a man who offered a solution to the divisions and injustices that plagued American society. However, even in these early days, there were signs of Jones's need for control. He demanded complete loyalty from his followers, encouraging them to sever ties with family members who were not supportive of the church. Public confessions became a regular part of temple life, with Jones using these moments to reinforce his authority. He began to cultivate a sense of paranoia, warning his congregation that outsiders were conspiring against them. This narrative of us versus them created a closed environment where Jones's word became the ultimate truth. The move to California, expansion and influence. By the mid-1960s, Jones had become increasingly frustrated with what he saw as the conservative and racially divided climate of Indiana. He believed that California, with its progressive culture and political climate, would be a more suitable base for his vision of an inclusive, socially active church. In 1965, he relocated the People's Temple to Ukiah, a small town in Northern California, which he believed would also be safe from the nuclear threat he often warned about in his sermons. This move marked a new phase for the People's Temple. California offered fertile ground for Jones's ideals, and the church began to grow rapidly, attracting people from all walks of life who were inspired by Jones's message of equality and justice. The temple expanded its operations, establishing branches in San Francisco and Los Angeles. It was during this time that the People's Temple became heavily involved in California politics, aligning itself with progressive causes, labor unions, and civil rights organizations. Jones's influence grew, and he began forging relationships with prominent political figures, including San Francisco Mayor George Moscone. The church's members became a powerful political force, often mobilized to attend rallies, protests, and demonstrations. The People's Temple provided a ready-made group of volunteers for political campaigns and causes, which allowed Jones to increase his standing within California's progressive circles. However, as Jones's power and influence grew, so did his need for control over his followers. The People's Temple had evolved from a church into an organization with strict rules and expectations. Members were required to attend long meetings, confess their sins publicly, and participate in rigorous, sometimes humiliating exercises designed to test their loyalty. Jones became increasingly authoritarian, using fear and psychological manipulation to maintain control. The rise of control and manipulation. Life within the People's Temple. Life within the People's Temple was far from the utopian ideal that Jones preached. As the congregation grew, so did the demands placed upon its members. Jones required them to work long hours in temple programs, donate large portions of their income, and sever connections with family members and friends outside the church. This isolation created a culture where the only source of truth and support came from within the temple, making members increasingly dependent on Jones. Jones's tactics of control were multifaceted. One of his most effective tools was public confession, where members were encouraged, or rather, coerced, into confessing personal failings in front of the congregation. These confessions were often exaggerated or fabricated, but they served a dual purpose: they reinforced members' dependency on Jones's guidance, and they created a culture of surveillance, where individuals were encouraged to monitor one another's behavior. Jones's influence extended beyond the pulpit. He carefully controlled information within the temple, urging members to avoid newspapers, radio, and television, which he claimed were tools of the oppressors. By isolating his followers from outside perspectives, he created a bubble where his version of reality was the only one they could accept. This isolation was especially effective as Jones increasingly painted a picture of the world as a dangerous, hostile place, where only the People's Temple could provide safety. Jonestown, the promise of a new world. In the mid-1970s, Jones faced growing scrutiny from the media and disillusionment among some of his members. Reports of financial misconduct, abuse, and strange practices began to surface, leading to investigations. Jones, feeling the pressure of this outside attention, decided to relocate the church once again, this time to a remote area in the jungles of Guyana, South America. Here, he believed, the People's Temple could finally escape the interference of American society and create a self-sustaining community based on his ideals. Jonestown was promoted as a paradise, a haven free from the racism, capitalism, and oppression of the outside world. For many of Jones's followers, the prospect of Jonestown was too good to pass up. They sold their belongings, said goodbye to their families, and uprooted their lives to join Jones in Guyana. For many, it was seen as a fresh start, a chance to create a new world based on the principles of equality and justice they had been promised. However, the reality of life in Jonestown was far from the utopian ideal. The settlement was isolated, with limited resources and infrastructure. The soil was poor, making it difficult to grow enough food to sustain the community. Harsh weather conditions, coupled with long workdays, left residents exhausted and malnourished. Privacy was virtually non-existent, and every aspect of life was controlled by Jones and his inner circle. Jones became increasingly paranoid and erratic, holding long, rambling meetings where he would deliver hours-long speeches warning of impending attacks from enemies both real and imagined. He began staging rehearsals for revolutionary suicide, instructing his followers to drink from cups that he claimed contained poison as a test of their loyalty. These rehearsals were designed to condition the members to accept death as a possible outcome of their commitment to the temple. _ The isolation of Jonestown and escalating paranoia. The isolation of Jonestown allowed Jones to tighten his control over the community. 4:0. You said more. ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. Continuing the narrative seamlessly. _ In Jonestown, Jones's control over his followers became absolute. The compound was surrounded by dense jungle, and guards, known as the Red Brigade, patrolled the perimeter, ensuring that no one could leave without permission. Daily life was carefully regimented, with work assignments, strict schedules, and mandatory attendance at long meetings where Jones would speak for hours. He maintained an omnipresence in the compound, using a loudspeaker system that broadcast his sermons and instructions throughout the day and night, ensuring that his voice was always in the minds of his followers. Jones's paranoia intensified in the isolation of the jungle. He began to speak of enemies closing in on Jonestown, warning his followers that the CIA, FBI, and American government were plotting to destroy them. He claimed that the outside world could not tolerate a community that embodied true equality and freedom. To reinforce this siege mentality, he organized frequent White Nights drills in which he warned his followers of an impending attack, calling them to the main pavilion to prepare for revolutionary suicide. These White Nights were both a test of loyalty and a psychological conditioning exercise. During these rehearsals, vats of liquid were distributed among the community, and members were told it contained poison. After drinking, they would be told that it was a test and that their willingness to die proved their loyalty. Through these drills, Jones normalized the idea of suicide as a form of resistance, slowly eroding his followers' natural survival instincts and increasing their willingness to die for the temple. Life and fear in Jonestown, daily hardships and psychological manipulation. The physical and psychological toll of life in Jonestown was immense. Conditions were harsh, with little food, limited medical supplies, and constant, grueling labor. Families were separated, children often placed under the direct control of Jones and his staff. Jones's ideology emphasized communal life, so children were taught to see him as their true parent, further weakening familial bonds and making individuals more reliant on him. This control over children became another way for Jones to ensure the loyalty of parents, who feared retaliation if they spoke against him. Jones manipulated his followers' fears and insecurities, using public humiliations and physical punishments to maintain control. Those who expressed doubts about the community's direction or conditions were labeled as traitors or spies, subjected to public denunciations, or forced into isolation. This punishment system created a culture of fear, where members monitored each other for signs of disloyalty. Jones encouraged this surveillance, rewarding those who reported others and fostering an atmosphere of suspicion. For those who wanted to leave Jonestown, the path was nearly impossible. Not only was the jungle surrounding the compound impenetrable for the unprepared, but Jones had convinced his followers that any attempt to escape would result in their capture by hostile forces. He frequently claimed that defectors would be tortured or killed by government agents waiting outside the compound, making the jungle seem like a prison and deepening the community's sense of isolation. _ The visit of Congressman Leo Ryan, a turning point. In late 1978, growing concerns from relatives of People's Temple members, as well as former followers who had left the temple, drew the attention of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan. Ryan had a reputation for investigating issues firsthand, and he took on the challenge of traveling to Jonestown to address allegations of abuse and the rumored conditions within the compound. On November 17, 1978, he arrived in Guyana with a small delegation of journalists, concerned relatives, and government aides. Initially, Jones and his inner circle attempted to present Jonestown in a positive light, staging performances and encouraging members to speak favorably about their lives there. Ryan and his team were given a carefully orchestrated tour of the compound, designed to hide the discontent that simmered beneath the surface. Followers were instructed to speak of the settlement as a paradise, a peaceful, idyllic community built on the principles of equality and justice. But as Ryan's delegation spent more time in Jonestown, cracks began to appear in the facade. Several residents managed to slip notes to members of the delegation, pleading for help to leave the compound. The bravery of these defectors emboldened others, and soon, more members came forward, expressing their desire to escape. The situation reached a breaking point when Ryan offered to take anyone who wished to leave back to the United States. This act of defiance represented the first open rebellion against Jones's control within Jonestown. Jones was furious. He felt his authority slipping and feared that the departure of even a small group of defectors would unravel his carefully constructed world. He knew that Ryan's report would bring further scrutiny and potential intervention from the U.S. government. In a desperate attempt to retain control, he ordered members of the Red Brigade to follow Ryan's delegation to the nearby airstrip and prevent them from leaving. _ The attack at the airstrip, violence unleashed. As Ryan's delegation prepared to board two small planes at the Port Kaituma airstrip, a truck carrying members of Jones's security team arrived. Armed with guns, the Red Brigade opened fire on the group, killing Congressman Ryan, 3 journalists, and one of the defectors. Several others were wounded but managed to escape into the jungle, where they hid until they were able to make their way back to safety. The attack on the airstrip marked a point of no return for Jones. He realized that the murder of a U.S. congressman would bring swift and severe repercussions. With his world crumbling around him, Jones made a final, horrific decision: to enact the revolutionary suicide he had long spoken of in his White Night rehearsals. He called his followers to the main pavilion, where vats of cyanide-laced flavor aid were prepared. _ The mass suicide, a final act of control. On the evening of November 18, 1978, over 900 men, women, and children gathered at the main pavilion. Jones announced that the time had come to make their revolutionary choice, presenting suicide as an act of protest against the oppression they had supposedly fled in America. He told them that the U.S. government would soon descend on Jonestown, capture their children, and torture the adults, painting death as a preferable alternative to the horrors he claimed awaited them. Mothers and fathers were instructed to give the poison to their children first. The heartbreaking scene that followed saw parents weeping as they administered the poison to their children, some of whom were too young to understand what was happening. Those who resisted or hesitated were forced to drink by Jones's guards. Armed members of the Red Brigade surrounded the pavilion, ensuring that no one could escape. As the poison took effect, the pavilion filled with cries of pain and terror, but Jones remained resolute. Some members tried to escape into the jungle but were either shot by guards or forcibly returned to the pavilion. The atmosphere was one of despair and helplessness as Jones's followers, weakened by years of manipulation and dependency, found themselves unable to resist his final command. Jones himself did not drink the poison. He was later found dead with a gunshot wound to the head, suggesting that he had either taken his own life or been killed by one of his closest followers. In total, 918 people perished at Jonestown, including over 300 children, in what would become one of the most tragic mass suicides in history. _ Aftermath and Legacy, Reflections on Jonestown. The Jonestown massacre sent shockwaves around the world. The photographs of bodies sprawled across the jungle floor became haunting reminders of the dangers of unchecked power and the profound psychological influence that a single individual could wield over hundreds. The tragedy raised complex questions about authority, belief, and vulnerability, forcing society to confront the dark side of charismatic leadership. In the aftermath, investigations revealed the extent of Jones's psychological control over his followers, from conditioning them to fear the outside world to manipulating their deepest insecurities. Families who had lost loved ones struggled to understand how their relatives could have fallen under Jones's sway, grappling with grief and the sense of betrayal that accompanied the loss. _ Thank you for following this deep exploration into the People's Temple and the Jonestown Massacre. In our next episode, we'll explore another tragic chapter in San Francisco's history, the fireworks disaster that changed public safety regulations in the city forever. Until then, thanks for listening to AI True Crime. The intelligence is artificial, but the crime is real. AI True Crime is generated by ChatGPT. The art is by Midjourney. The voice is by Speechelo.